Now we're back to learning to code. Let's go over the 14th course on freecodecamp.org. We are still in a responsive web design section and we've got the next certification project to complete. I'm just going to show you how to parse it. Obviously you can style it in your own way and you should do. It provides you a further chance to test, experiment and learn. But if you just want to parse it, follow my walkthrough. We've got the user story. It has 15 bullet points and all of these smaller tests. Let's just dive right in and we'll treat it as a regular project. So we'll start with the doc type, HTML, the head and body. Within the head, we'll already add the typical elements. For example, the meta char set will link our styles.css. We can also give it a title. Let me make it responsive first. So meta name equals report. And we need to set the content so that the width equals the device width. And we'll start with an initial scale of 1.0. For the link, we'll need a relationship attribute style sheet, and the href is, as it always is in freecodecamp, but it's also given below the user story. So if you can't remember it fully, check it there. I'll just call it technical documentation page for FCC certification project. That should be enough as an example. So we are done with the basics in our head. And here you can see it. So right below the user story where it says node, you'll find the link to the CSS. Now let's go to the user story. The first bullet point will need a main element with an ID of main doc. Everything else will be nested inside of it. Bullet point 2, we need several sections. Each will have the same class. It's called main minus section. And we should have a minimum of 5. So I'll copy this one, Ctrl C, and then I paste it 4 times. We also need a header element, but in each of these sections, and it also needs to be the first element inside of each. So we gotta keep that in mind. Let me directly add some text. Maybe we'll make it about HTML. Once again, it's just an example. You can make it about anything that you want. But it's a good idea to create such a documentation page for your own personal archive. Let me make it H2s. And I'll change the text a little bit for each section. So I'll make it about introduction, basic text, tables, forms, and maybe media. Let's go to bullet point 4. We also need an ID for each section. And this one's specific for each, so we can't just copy paste it. I'll stick to the H2s that I've created with the ID. And we need underscores whenever we have a white space. So always write it like this. example here for the second section, HTML, and then underscore basic underscore tags. So that should be fine for bullet point 4. Number 5, we need paragraphs. We need at least 10 in total, so in all of the sections combined. And they need to be inside of the main section, but we already know that we have to put everything inside of it. So our sections are nested inside of the main, therefore the paragraphs are also, if we nest them inside of the sections. If you've forgotten, paragraphs have an opening and a closing tag. It's simply the P. And I'll just create a couple. And now we should have 10. So we can move on to bullet point 6. What do we need here? We need to have at least 5 code elements. We haven't used that before in freecodecamp, so let me get back to the example given, and you can see right here it has a different formatting, but that's primarily achieved via CSS. Or we'll have to use it anyway, so we can do so right here, and maybe you want to style it afterwards. But styling it is not necessary to just pass it. The code elements have an opening and closing tag. And you can see if we want to, for example, write the doc type HTML, we're going to create some issues as the code editor doesn't know that we just want to use this smaller than sign. So we'll have to use a placeholder for that. And in HTML it's this and sign and then LT for lesser than. And if you want to have a greater than sign, you use the end sign and then GT. And that's the way you can show that in a browser window. So it's not getting mistaken as code, as extra code. Instead, it's seen as something that you want to have as a text in your browser window. I also use BR tags. These are line breaks. So whenever you want to force a line break onto something, you'll just add it. It doesn't have a closing tag. And now I'll just add these 5 code sections. Nothing too fancy. And now we're good with this one. Let's jump to number 7. We need at least 5 LE items. So these are list items. You can, for example, use an unordered list for that. And I give a small list of input types. So we need our UL tag and nested inside the LE tags. And I have opening and closing tags. And you can already see our bullet points that this unordered list item creates. Now I'll add a little bit of text inside of them. And it should be enough as an example for the input types. And we've got bullet point 7 covered in our user story. Let us now head to bullet point 8, and we need a nav element, so a navbar or navigation bar. And let us check it. We can put it right here. The element is written like this, nav, and it has a closing tag. And usually you use unordered lists for navigation bars. But let me first add the ID that we need to have this test passed. It's navbar. The navbar element should contain one header as well, so we'll add that. And you can see this as the main heading. So I'll just call it HTML documentation. Something like this. And I use an H1 for the other headlines. I've used an H2. So it's always a good idea to only use one H1 per website. Let me check bullet point 10. And here we can now add our unordered list. We'll nest the list items inside. And we'll make each of them a link. So we're going to use the anchor element. We've got 5 sections, so I'll use 5 LE items. Put the anchor element inside and then give that a class of navlink. So that's also a must to pass this. And now I'll add text that fits the sections that we've got. So HTML introduction, HTML basic tags, and so forth. The class is always the same for the anchor element. So that should be fine. Let's check bullet point 11. We've got that. The header must come before the links. Bullet point 12. We need to have the text. We should also pass this. Let's go to 13. And now we'll create internal linking. So we're going to use an href and then link to these different sections. We can target the IDs of the sections. So we use this hashtag icon and then make sure that this is written the same way. So HTML underscore introduction, it must be written exactly the same way to target this ID. And we can do so for every single one of these links and every single one of these sections. So the second uses an href of hashtag HTML underscore basic underscore tags and so forth. And you can click on them already, and you can see that the browser window then jumps to the specific section. Alright, and now we're good with bullet point 13. Number 14. And number 15 is stuff that we'll have to adjust in the CSS. Let me run the tests. And we are almost done. So we've got everything up to here correctly done. And now it's only about CSS. Let me make that a bit bigger so that we can see properly. Let us directly select our navbar. We can, for example, use the ID. Right here, it's navbar. And we need to make sure that it's always on the left side. There are many ways to achieve that, but I'm just going to show you stuff that we've already covered in freecodecamp, and I'll leave the rest aside, so it's just a simple example. In this example, I'm just going to position the navbar so that it's fixed, and I'm going to position the main. I set it to absolute, and then give it a little bit of a margin so that it moves to the right hand side. So margin left, let me try 200, and it wasn't enough, but you can see at 250, this is what we wanted to have. So our navbar is now always on the left hand side, and the main is right next to it. You can reposition the navbar, for example, use top of 0 to push it a little bit to the top. Let me even go to a negative value. It's still on the page. And you can set the left to 0 to pull it completely to the left hand side, so the left border of our browser window. Now let me check if I have done what we needed to do. That looks fine for bullet point 14. And for 15 we need a media query. Once again, it's just an example, something that we've already covered in the previous courses. But you can do more complex stuff in your own personal project. You always need the @ sign, then media, then the normal brackets, then curly brackets. And let me, for example, select the navbar. Right here. So I'll use the ID once more. And at a certain size for the browser window, I want the position to switch to absolute. And then set the width to like 50%. Let me use for the media, so our entire browser window, a max width of 500 pixels. And if I reposition this now, you can see that at some point our navbar switches into a different position. And I can readjust the top, pull it a little bit downwards so that we can see properly. Let me make like 50. Maybe that's good enough. But 40 might be a better value. And for the main, let me select that as well in my media query. I'm using directly the main element, so I don't need a hashtag or a dot for a class before it. And I'll set the margin maybe to 170. So when we have a smaller browser window, the margin gets reduced as our navbar collapses a little bit, you could say. And that should be enough to have a media query to pass the final run test here. But you can style it further if you want to. Let's say you want to change the font family, but afterwards you'll have to adjust the margin once more for everything. Keep that in mind. Whatever you do from here on, it's just optional. We should already pass this certification project with what we've done so far. Oh yeah, and before I forgot, I told you we can select the code, for example, and then add its formatting. Make it, for example, light gray as a background. Something like this. Alright, let me run the test again, and we have passed everything that there was. So this is how you can pass this certification project on freecodecamp. I hope this video was helpful, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.